everybody. Welcome to the Unconventional Therapist Guide to Nothing. My name is Dave. I'm joined here with Greg, who is my co-host of sorts.
Hmm. Yes.
Navigator,
Um,
co-pilot,
Co-pilot. Yeah, I like all those.
lackey,
Now you're falling off a little bit. I'm here with you,
busboy.
and we are not following each other. We're sort of I would say complementary to each
What
other.
do you call those the kids that like carry your golf clubs?
A caddy.
My caddy,
That's
Greg.
me. Yeah, I'll carry your clubs. Fine. If that's what
Thank
you
you,
want.
Greg.
So
Can you
Dave,
can you
this
drive my golf cart too?
I would love to. In fact, that's all I've ever I had a job driving a golf cart for a few weeks.
For celebrities, right?
Nope. It just had like that little thing on the back of the basket where it picked up the balls on a driving range. It was awesome. I would have done it forever, but I forgot.
Weren't you the oldest person to ever do that job?
That was
Wasn't
two
that
years
your
ago.
title
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, that was 2 years ago. Yeah. Ageism. I'm still fighting it in law. I mean, in court. Um, Dave, this is one of those that I'm shocked we haven't gotten into yet.
Right.
I know you hate it when I get right into it, but let me ask you a question. When you think of the summer of '69, and now don't be crass, like what usually, like what does that induce thoughts of?
Is it Brian Adams that sings that song?
It sure is.
Yeah, that's what I think of, and I
It's the
hate that
Canadian
song.
Richard Marx, I
I
call him.
freaking hate that song. Is
Really?
that weird?
Um, no, it's a shitty song.
It really is. It's not a
Yeah,
good
but I do
song.
like Brian Adams. The whole
Oh
whatever
yeah,
he did with
Robin Hood.
Robin Hood. Yeah, I mean, it'll melt your heart. Um, But when I think of the summer of '69, I think of like a little, you know what I think of? I think of a little flower in the barrel of a gun. And I think of love and not typically horrific crime.
Why not?
It's just not where my mind goes when I think of the summer of '69. And another paradox, Dave, we're going to be able to talk about is we're going to talk about a person, an infamously evil person, synonymous, I think, with the most heinous type of murder you can ever think of. He didn't actually kill. I mean, it's up for debate if he ever killed anybody ever, but he didn't actually kill the people that he's famously sort of connected to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, no, this here's a guy
So
like
he dabbles on that line of serial killer
I know. No, you do think of his
and
name, yeah,
and cult leader.
yeah. And here's a guy like no formal education, no influence, certainly no cultural capital, and before you know it, well, in his early 30s, he's playing the flute in the woods. He's hobnobbing with famous people. He's leading beautiful women who dutifully follow his every command. And Dave, I think one of the most startling facts about this is he's 5'2".
Yeah.
That matters, right? So we're talking about Charles Manson here. And Dave, when you thought of Charles Manson in the past, which I'm sure you often have, um, do you think killer?
Well, I knew I've no for a long time. Maybe I did until I actually knew the story, and then I was always confused as to why he had that reputation or why people looked at him that way. But overall, just like kind of a crazy guy that also has that the thing that always got me with him is he gets that draw from people. Like
Yeah,
there's people that are like they act like they're fans of his.
sure.
And when you actually know the story, you start to despise this person actually.
Yeah, so I think that, well, I don't know. I might fall a little bit different. So I'm not a huge Manson fan. But I think that understanding the early life, I sort of, it's hard to hate somebody when you know their story and how they came, but because of what he did and what he ordered to be
His
done, yeah,
views
he's
are more
vile.
of what bother me.
Yeah, yeah, but of course they're all horrific, but you got to think of little Beth Thomas and how she was thinking about snapping little birds' necks and stabbing her brother with needles. You guys have to listen to the reactive attachment disorder episode that we did if you want to understand that a little bit more. But did you hate that little girl because she was so evil, or did you think to yourself, how did she get this evil?
Um I'm struggling. making
Mm.
the same comparison because she's a little girl. You know what I mean?
I know
If
it.
she was
Well,
a full grown adult, I'm like, would I still have the same feeling I have about her as a young child?
so okay, and just like every other trauma and how it makes other people act, like I think the same thing applies here. It certainly doesn't excuse the horrible behavior, but it does explain it, which gives us some insight into the way, how important it is, the development of a child, how important it is.
Mm-hmm.
And with that, I think maybe we should get into Dave. Like I can kind of take us through his early life. So he's born in West Virginia. So he's, hill folk, as he considers himself. He's born to a 15-year-old mother, Kathleen Maddox, no father. So we've already talked about how that's kind of a problem. No paternal influence in his life. The mother goes to prison for robbing a store when he's now accounts vary on this, but 10 years old. So Charlie then he moves in with his mother's sister, his aunt Jenna, but his uncle makes him wear a dress to school almost every day. Thinks it'll
Hmm.
toughen him up. Says it's good for him. I mean, I think my grandfather had some views like that. I mean, my father's middle name's Amy, so
Interesting.
yeah. And there's that Johnny Cash song, "A Boy Called Sue." But maybe there's some toughening up around that. But making a little, and he's little. He's always been little. This little guy wear a dress to school is probably going to come back to bite everyone, really. So he's abandoned by his mom over and over. This isn't just once that she gets sent to prison. She's over and over. She's letting him live with like strange people she meets in bars. Even one time she sells him for a pitcher of beer and this to some woman that she worked with. And the woman's like, I didn't even really like, and she ends up giving him back, right? So Charlie's early life is all like this. At 13, she tries to have him placed in foster care, but the state is kind of like, well, you're his mother, like you need to
Right.
take care of him, right? So he's in and out of juvenile hall because he's getting himself into trouble. He's stealing, he's a burglar, he steals cars. At 15, he's sent to Father Flanagan's Boys Town, where he's not molested, but is molested in the Indiana juvenile system.
Yeah.
Um, so he has this, you know, he has to steal to survive. He has no idea like what it means to be values. He doesn't know what it means to be a good person. He's in and out of prison. These are the people that are influencing him, these other kids. So as time goes on, he just becomes this career criminal. And at 20 years old, after all this, after being in and out of juvenile hall, in and out of prisons, he gets out of jail and he tries to find his mom to rekindle that relationship. And he does find her, and he does sort of develop a relationship with her. He settles in, he marries a 17-year-old, gets her pregnant, has a little Charlie Manson, goes back to prison and abandons his first son, who will eventually, sadly, complete suicide, his
Hmm.
first son, which is really sad. I mean, and obviously there's a kid with no, father influence. And when your father's Charles Manson, so it's not great. So he gets out of prison again eventually, and now he's in California. He's working as a pimp. He's he marries a prostitute and creates another little Charles Manson he will eventually abandon, but no one ever knows what happened to this kid. I don't know if you found anything on him, but he's just kind of the mother was smart enough to take him completely out of, the limelight. He doesn't want anyone to
Sure.
know whose son he's probably thriving or thrived. Um, so in and out of prison some more, meets a man in prison named Alvin Creepy Carpus. And this is
Hmm.
the person who teaches him how to play guitar. Now, he's like an evil Forrest Gump, Charles Manson, because it's like he's meeting all these interesting people. This guy, Creepy Carpus, he is one of I don't know, there's only like 4 or 5 people who have ever been public enemy number one. And he's also the longest serving prisoner to ever serve in Alcatraz, this guy. So this is who teaches Charles Manson how to play the guitar.
Guy's the real
So
deal.
he's the real deal, right? So eventually, at 32, Manson's released from prison. He heads to San Francisco, moves in with a 23-year-old librarian who we'll talk about after,
Yeah.
who he convinces her to let another 18-year-old girl who he meets live with them both. and begin this sort of relationship. So this guy from an early age, or I mean, he's definitely displaying it now. He has something, right? You don't just like meet a 20, 30. They're
So
pretty women too.
let's take a pause here and let's
Okay.
reflect on this upbringing because we just kind of glossed over a lot of events that have happened, right?
Sure.
So one of the most important things is looking at that early development with him, his absent father and his mother, right?
Hmm.
So zero father influence. We already covered that in our episode about the importance of fatherhood. So we kind of know that that already kind of sets him off on the wrong foot. But that treatment by his mom, that abandonment,
Hmm.
and then like reconnection, that abandonment, the reconnection. Um, I think I heard something about like just her kind of just taking off at times and kind of
Constantly.
just basically living her own life while this child is there, you
As
know?
if he doesn't exist, you know?
And almost as if like, hey, you're on your own here. And
So it's, yeah, to
and
me, I'm thinking about it. It's like in these years, these early development years that are supposed to be where he's like forming his identity, instead of doing that, he's just surviving. So he had to develop the skills of like manipulation, and he had to,
yeah,
you know, in time he's going to, crave that belonging. And when he finally did belong, which he will eventually feel like he belongs somewhere, he would probably wonder to himself, like, how do I bind these people to me forever to ensure I'm never alone again? I never have to have that feeling of like abandonment ever again. Like,
he he actually was praising his mother for her treatment towards him, and he felt that it taught him how to take care of himself.
mm,
So it's almost like he doesn't understand,
no, he doesn't
that
get it, and he never.
there's a different way and that it shouldn't look like that, and that like the way that he's learned to take care of himself is not the way that most people need to take care of themselves. So
It's a
he's
very,
thanking his mom for something that actually is like a major deficit to his ability to find success.
yeah, or
He
maybe like it's maybe he can't live with the idea that like my mother just did not give a shit about me.
It could be self-deceit, but it
Yeah,
also is it's his ability to kind of roll with the punches and just kind of find a path and just go for it. But like his ultimate goal really seems to be to to be important. Like
yeah.
that
So
whole, what he develops with the girls, his drive to be famous. In that when he meets creepy Carpus,
yeah,
I mean, they're like really I'm not gonna say enabling. They're like egging this on a little bit because he would play stuff and they'd be like, yeah, yeah, like you know, I think they're like just being good sports in a way.
right,
Like this
right.
guy's showing interest in them. He's learning from them. I'm sure that feels good for them to be of use to someone and someone actually showing interest. Um, but they kind of like put that bug in his head, like he's got something.
You know, it's interesting too when you were talking about the mother and what he was learning from her. I was thinking of something where it's like we talk about values a lot and the importance, like which values are important, which values are useful. And I'm thinking to myself, like, his mother only cared about feeling good. Right? That like pleasure. That was her only value, and that's a shitty, shitty value. She just wanted to feel good, and that's all he wanted. It didn't matter who was gonna hurt. It didn't matter who he had to deceive. He just wanted to feel good.
Yeah.
And when you just want to feel good, we even people with like who are suffering with depression or anxiety, like sometimes you get caught in that thing where it's like I just want to feel good. When the reality is like to feel good, you almost have to do good in the world, right? You can't just seek pleasure and feeling good. We've talked about this last time, and I really like it's interesting how this keeps coming up.
And
Um,
that whole thing with like you made the point of how at one point even selling him for a pitcher of beer. Think about what that does for your frame of mind of how important other people are.
mhm.
So if you're willing to give up your son for a pitcher of beer, in his mind, like everybody is like dispensable, right? Like
Yeah, disposable. Yeah, that's a great point. Like, they're the value on humans. If this is how the most sacred relationship in the world, he's probably getting the idea like through some um out there in the world that there's a sacred relationship between mother and son, and then the only, like, knowledge he has of that is like, "Oh, yeah, it's pretty sacred, it's the most important relationship," but she'll still sell you for a pitcher of beer, so I can kind you can kinda treat people who aren't your family,
Yeah.
like, it doesn't matter what how you
Like,
treat them.
actually, last episode we were just talking about that whole thing with like narcissism and putting yourself before others
Mhm.
always. And I mean, that's essentially it, right? And that's what he ends
Yeah,
up doing time and time again through all the people he meets in his life. He uses them towards to help him achieve his goals.
right.
And I mean, never does, but
No, and the way he treats people, like, for example, so after he's 32, he's released, he's living this 23-year-old librarian, he meets this preacher who is, probably arguably a good person, Dean Morehouse, and, this guy really likes him, he lets Charlie live there for a little bit, he actually gives Charlie a piano that he trades for the infamous microbus that Charlie drives
Mhm.
around, but not before Charlie manages to convince his 16-year-old daughter to leave with him.
yeah.
And Morehouse chases him down and finds him and wants to kill him, but somehow Manson, with his, I don't know, manipulation, convinces Morehouse that it's okay, and they become like friendly again. It's so strange. And
So
then
yeah, Greg, before you go on with some of the next stories, let me actually just get into like because this already at this point, he's
yeah,
recruiting women for his Manson family. And you already mentioned the first one, so I just wanted to go into that a little bit.
okay, go ahead.
So the first person he met was that Mary Brunner, and he had
Mhm.
just gotten out of prison, right? And she's not dumb. Like she's not, these aren't all like um unintelligent people. Like she's a 23-year-old graduate. She graduated from University of Wisconsin Madison. Um, he just uses his like whatever that is, his charisma, his charm, and he almost like also he kind of wears people down. It seems like he just keeps going and pushing people to like feel like it's okay, it's okay. So he ends up, like you said, he moves in with her, and then he ends up getting her to kind of give in, and then let he brings the other women in, which is where he ends up at one point like getting like I think 18 other women to live
Yeah,
in this woman's house. So again, it's like that idea of like I bring people in and then I use them for the way I need them. So he needs the place to stay, but also this is going to be the start of his little like family, his compound.
right.
And he has a sense, and this is probably true for most people who are like con artists, right? He has a sense for people who are emotionally insecure and like social outcasts. So maybe that it's not that they're not intelligent, but maybe he senses that they're like missing something or they're
Yeah,
yearning for something. He gets like a sense from them, it feels like, and he can prey on that. And he provides like Koresh, you know, that ability to make people believe you are who you say you are just by
yeah,
the fact that you believe it so much. And he believes like he establishes himself as like a guru, right? And it's the perfect time for this because it's that time of hippie
oh
love, and
yeah,
he's in the place for he's in this place, Height Ashbury, I guess,
yep.
which
The Haight
was like
Ashbury district. Yep.
hate. All right, so and it was it's an emerging like hippie locale, right?
Oh,
And
absolutely.
um yeah, this is his first group of followers, and most of them are female. So clearly, like he's found the ability to lure in a certain population at this point. I mean, his family is not like only female, but at this point it is. Um, and he allegedly taught his followers that they were the reincarnation of original Christians, and that the establishment could be characterized as the Romans. So actually, well, one thing we didn't mention, also in prison, was he connected with someone who was into Scientology,
Okay.
and he starts to actually study Scientology, and he uses that as part of like his rhetoric. Um, that idea that we don't die, we just move our souls or whatever go into like other vessels.
Yeah,
um like he kind of uses that as a way to talk about things, reincarnation, um so that's there. And then there's also this Christian side of him because he's connected with Christian people at some point as well in his journey, and he uses these things pretty heavily to kind of formulate his like philosophy, I guess. And
Yeah, no,
that's
it's very interesting what you're saying, and like you were mentioning, it's the hippies and that San Francisco at that time. It's it's the summer of love, it's all these things, but what it's really about is you're right, like this disillusionment with the ideas and values of the culture at the time. So like
yeah.
Vietnam and conservatism, and even Christianity, where it's like, hey, look, Christianity lost its way. Where I'm the original incarnation of Christianity, so you know it's their counterculture. That's the problem. That's the sort of the problem with the hippies, right? It's counterculture, but you don't really have a response for it. So it's not like you're saying this culture right here is terrible. It should be this. It's just this culture right here is terrible, and leave it at that. So
Would you
it's
have
just
ever
right.
associated this time with Scientology?
No.
I thought that this was way early for Scientology, but I had no idea. So like this is like in 67, they're talking about Scientology. Which I think I was just kind of like really surprised by, but interesting how he uses that. And it makes total sense. Like hippie love,
Yeah.
spirituality,
Yep.
reincarnation, like what an amazing thing for him to stumble across and say like, ding, 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 this is something right here. Right. And like, and at his family, which I'll talk a little bit more after you go into some of the other situations or people that he's run into, what their philosophy turns to. But like at one point, his family consists of at least like 100 members.
Oh, absolutely. And look, you could be like, why would when we talk about like what he's like wondering and what he's the things he's thinking about, and even right now when you're talking about Manson kind of preaching reincarnation and all these crazy things, remember disillusionment. They don't know where the path is. They just know they don't like the one that they're on. But also add a little bit of isolation when
Yeah,
they, that's what cults do. They isolate, and a ton of LSD will make you start
yeah,
like thinking about
yeah,
things in a little
yeah.
bit of a
Lots of
different way.
drugs. He also had very like his gender ideals were interesting, considering his target audience is these younger females. He believes males are are like kind of more dominant
Hmm.
in and that women are should be subservient. So they're there basically to serve, which he uses
Yes.
them to serve frequently. And like when I say serve, use your imaginations. It's more than
Sir.
just cooking dinner.
Right.
It's the full duties. And he's obviously having sex with every single woman that he comes across. And actually to the point where if they don't have sex with him, he's quick to temper.
Yeah, and he is sort of it's reminiscent of Koresh in a lot
Very
of
much. And
ways.
the more I'm saying this, the more I'm like, wow, actually wasn't that the same with Koresh? Um,
Yeah.
so back to kind of his journey, because you're gonna mention a really some more notable people.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and it just funny as like you're saying that, I'm kind of thinking like this is like one of those clashes in history where it's like mommy issues meets daddy issues. That's what's going on here, a lot of that. And
Yeah.
that's like two like very interesting things that we could kind of talk about at some point. But you're right, it does get more interesting because one of the men, geez, I can't think of his name now, but he's driving along and he's headed back to where Manson and the family are, and he picks up a hitchhiker, and the hitchhiker happens to be Dennis Wilson, who is, if you don't know, he's a member of the Beach Boys, who you certainly know, right? This guy enters the picture. Dennis thinks that Manson has something here. He thinks Manson's got some talent. Also, he gets picked up and he gets brought back to Manson, and there's like tons of beautiful women around too. So Dennis is kind of like, okay, yeah, this is kind of awesome. So Dennis kind of takes this back to Brian Wilson, who is he has schizoaffective disorder, awesome
Yeah.
guy. He disagrees. He thinks because Brian Wilson, if you know anything about the Beach Boys, which I'm actually kind of a big fan, especially Pet Sounds, he is like the genius behind the Beach Boys. He kind of like orchestrates everybody and like hears it all in his head before it happens. And so Dennis shows this to Brian. He's like, "Hey, you gotta listen to this guy." And Brian's like, "No, this is garbage," right? And if you like, it just kind of stinks. But interestingly, um, Manson, or whatever he wrote with Dennis Wilson, and it was revised quite a bit.
Yeah.
Um,
And
he
Manson's credit was taken away completely.
Right, but something Manson worked on was, hit number 61 on the charts, which is kind of crazy to think
Yeah,
about,
I
right?
forget the title. There was I forget what the original I can't remember either title, to
I
be honest with you.
w
Um,
Guns N' Roses covered it on the Spaghetti Incident. Oh, they
oh,
covered a Manson song on the, and I listened to a couple of the Manson songs, and I was thinking like, no, actually, you know what? And I'll be honest, the songs that I listened to were terrible, but his voice wasn't, if that makes sense. Like you were
sure.
like, oh, okay, like
Yeah. So
he's
his
got a
big thing was he was trying to find people to connect with to get him a record deal. That was his
yeah,
big goal. That so I in the thing though is with everything with Manson, he uses people to the extent where I think he almost like takes everything from them to the
yeah,
point where there's the only thing left is anger. Or and that seems to be the case with Dennis at least. So like he presses him pretty heavy, but they basically are living at his house
yeah.
and they're using his credit at the local store to
Mhm.
get groceries for them. There's a number of them. I mean, Dennis is benefiting because you know he's having relations with all the
Yes,
lady
tons of women
members,
around. Yeah.
tons of women. He's doing drugs with them all. But I mean, they're really taking advantage of him.
They're taking advantage of him, and then Manson, who's upset after all this, and like, the revisions and everything, and the credit getting taken away from Manson, he tries to attack Dennis Wilson, which the Beach Boy promptly won that fight, which is kind of,
Yeah,
funny to think about, right? Like Charles Manson
against
fighting
a Beach Boy.
a Beach Boy, right?
Yeah.
It's like, what even are we
Well,
talking about here?
and like I don't know too much about the Beach Boys, but I never really had a vision of them as like surfer guys. But from what I understand, Dennis was like that surfer
Yes,
beach. He was the actual Beach Boy out of the Beach Boys. He was
yes,
like
he
this
was.
stereotypical surfer. Also had a challenging childhood
Mhm.
upbringing. So like maybe they connected on some level through some of that without like unspoken in ways. But one of the ones that Manson got one of the females that Manson got upset with for not sleeping with him was actually, I think it was Dennis's girlfriend or a girl that he was with at one point, and Manson tried to advance with her. When she denied him, he actually pulled a knife on her, and that was like that was kind of like when he was really starting to lose it. It sounds
Yeah.
like it was like he was just kind of spiraling at this point.
All right, so let's take them over like where people might start to pick up this idea of when they think of the Manson family. So in 1968, they moved to the Spahn Ranch, and
Yeah,
we'll talk about this a little bit. But if you've ever seen the movie Once Upon a Time in L.A.,
Hollywood.
Hollywood, yes, I mean, I didn't realize this was so. As I'm like kind of like researching this and Spahn Ranch and the owner and the way that the women were kind of interacting with him and how they were kind of stringing him along, whatever it is. Um, I didn't know that they were kind of like really playing this. It's kind of all about this story, except in a really cool way where it's like if you have a nightmare and you change the ending,
Yeah,
and
they
then you
changed
kind of
the
like
ending.
it
Yeah.
kind of like it can you can like settle in a little bit where and you can kind of like reprocess it and kind of like it's almost like awesome
Well,
that that movie takes this story and kind of like I don't know, maybe heals the world in a way from it a little bit.
what the thing that's happening in the background of all of this is there is a big shift happening in society in the 60s. Like we're transferring from the 60s to the 70s. The messages are different. There's a lot of events that are going to occur that kind of change the way people feel. Um, but another big thing that's happening in the background of all this is Hollywood is changing,
Hmm.
and there's this younger group of people feeling like they're not represented on in movies, and they're not going to see these movies anymore. And that's when you're getting like Dennis Hopper, Peter Fonda, like Easy Rider,
Hmm.
like these outcast drug taking people doing things. Like Hollywood's starting to change, and that's all happening in the background, which is why I think that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood movie kind of like really does reflect a lot of this, because it's all happening around this time that this really big, really famous murder happens
Yeah.
involving Hollywood people.
Yeah, and you know what's also cool when you think about when you get into the nitty gritty of these little Charles Manson stories, then that's why I brought up Forrest Gump earlier. It's like I mean, like, Bruce Lee came up and, like, all kinds of these like, when you're hanging around the Haight-Ashbury district or California or San Francisco or the Laurel Canyon or what at this
Yeah.
time, I mean, everyone's there just hanging out.
Yep.
Like, it's
Yep.
crazy that, like, all these famous people and all these, I don't wanna quote unquote "regular people," are hanging out, and it's just kind of like it must have been a really crazy, fun we like,
It
Dennis Wilson's hitchhiking.
yeah.
What's happening?
Yeah. It's he's in this place where it must feel stardom is so attainable.
Mhm.
Like to us in our everyday lives, it feels
That's a
very
good point.
unattainable.
Yeah, that's
I
a good
don't
point.
I don't feel like I can just become a star. I feel like there would be 1,000 steps I have to do in order for that to happen. But with all the people that you're brushing against there, you're walking down the street and you're seeing like there's so many people connected to Charles Manson through like a family member or even directly. It's insane when you hear the story and you hear all the different stories of people connected to him. It's wild. So it kind of makes you understand a little bit why he holds on to this like idea that he's going to become a star. And he's
Yeah.
obsessed with the Beatles and like everything they do is the best. And he's like he has like this idea that like he's going to become that level of stardom, I think.
Yeah, yeah, no, and it is interesting too because it's when you think of a guy like Dennis Wilson, I mean, the Beach Boys are huge in the early '60s, but they're still huge. It's not
No,
like it's
well,
like
when
some
he
slug.
meets Dennis Williams,
The popularity is going down,
yeah,
Wilson, yeah.
Dennis Wilson, yeah, they actually, I guess, Pet Sounds flopped when it
It
first
did flop,
released.
but honestly, it's incredible and it influenced
Well,
like the
I
Beatles'
no
Rubber
offense to your
Soul.
opinion,
I'm just
yeah, but
saying.
like, no, I'm just saying. But at this time,
Yeah.
he is at a point where they're actually at risk.
Mhm.
The Beach Boys are at risk. So meeting someone like Charles Manson, having like this interesting guy who has so inspired and so
That's
like
true.
so has is
True.
so driven, it must be like, hey, maybe this will help. And
Yeah,
it seems
he's
like
gotta be
he's
thinking to
taking it.
himself, there's something to this guy. He's surrounded by women. He just kind of gets things. He just kind of makes things happen,
Yeah.
and people are he's got all these followers, like, what's his deal? Like, there must be
Until
something I
he
can tap
actually
in.
experiences
Yeah,
why Charles Manson gets all the things he wants. Like, and it's because
yeah.
he uses and takes advantage and,
He
just,
has 0 values. If you have no moral
yeah,
code at all, you can take advantage of people it's actually pretty fucking easy. You know what I mean? Like,
I
if
guess.
I guess, right? I mean, I don't know. So what do you wanna get into, like, his sort of grisly ideas and his, like, his
Well,
odd
yeah, because I
sort of
think like
philosophy?
there's all this spirituality happening at first, and we're talking about reincarnation, hippie love, all that stuff.
Mhm.
Um, at some point, though, they start to become more of like this doomsday cult, and he really is fixated on the idea of like this imminent race war that's going to
Mhm.
come. And that America's like black minority are going to attack and take over the white population, and they're going to overpower them. Like, and this is all happening around the time of like the civil rights movements
Yeah.
happening in conjunction with this as well, which in someone who has these views eyes, like that's a major risk to see like civil rights. We can't have civil rights. They're going to take over.
Mhm.
He really believes that, you know, they are stronger, but he has this other horrible vision, idea that while black people are stronger, they are not as intelligent as white people in his mind. So he feels that if they, get together and they can outsmart, I guess would be the best way to put it. Um,
Yeah.
but he did, was preaching that the black people would rise up and kill the entire white population, except for Manson and his followers, because they weren't intelligent enough to do that.
Yeah, and he also, like, as the LSD really, like, settled in, some of Manson's ideas were, me and my family will create an album to send hidden messages to the people, and that'll kind of like because he's warning that this race war will happen, but he's also wants it to happen. Is like part of the prophecy, so it kind of needs to happen. And he's thinking like, oh well, maybe I'll just live in a city underneath Death Valley. And when after the black people kill everyone, he can come out and they'll be so relieved to see them because like you said, like he doesn't feel like the black community would be able to manage the situation without his leadership, which is completely insane. And so like he thinks that the black people would be want this race war because he's taking all the white women. Charles Manson is like his idea is to get all the white women so that black men are like, wait, there's no more white women. We have to kill everyone.
Oh my
It's
god.
just it's wild
And that
that he
idea of the hidden messages in albums, like he starts to do that a lot with like the Beatles, right?
yes, he
And like
does.
that song Helter Skelter,
Yep.
he believes is about, it's referring to like the upcoming war.
I know. And poor Paul and John Lennon are like, what? You
Yeah,
know what
so
I mean?
I mean that's what they listen to. The family's listening to the Beatles constantly and hearing these messages and basically just like like brainwashing themselves.
Yeah, no, it's hard. If you listen to the White Album, which I have and like a lot, it's hard to believe that they would be able to pull that from some of these songs. I mean, I think Rocky Raccoon's on the White Album. It's like, I don't know how you're getting like Evil Murder out of that, but
Yeah.
I mean, the Beatles were all about kind of peace and love, right?
It's funny though, because like when you're getting wrapped up into this story, you almost start to because the Beatles have like a little bit of a shift, right? They go from like
Sure.
that 50s like pop, you know, to more of like hippie but like when you think about the hippie culture it through the lens of a Manson, it almost makes the hippie culture look really like dark,
I
right?
know, which is
Weird.
interesting. Yeah, and certainly weird. Like, yeah, because you're taking something that's supposed to mean something so benign and actually like love, and you're sort of like using that in an insidious way. It's dark. It's like when
Yeah.
it's like when a bad cop or a bad teacher or a bad priest, right? All these like
Hmm.
horrible things, it makes it worse
You
because
know,
he's, you know,
what it
you
reminds
know,
me of? It's like that juxtaposition of when you put like a really like um happy song to
yeah,
like a creepy like video or something,
Jeepers
and it
Creepers, right?
changes the, yeah, or like the Mr. Sandman or something like
Yeah,
that with
dude,
Halloween.
totally.
And like there's a lot of like 60s music, if you put it to the right like video or frame or story, it does have like a dark, like what's that, um what's I'm trying, there's a few songs, the Birds, is it, or the Zombies, I can't remember. There's a song that like
Time
I
of the
feel like,
season, yeah.
yeah, there's like stuff like that, like I feel like you play it like around Halloween to like when people are making reels on Instagram, like you
Oh,
put it to
absolutely.
like spooky stuff, right.
And you're like, yeah, yeah. Then you can never kind of like, yeah, it's sort of like it changes the way like the emotion that that song gives you, which is
Yes.
with a visual, which is just crazy and super
as
interesting.
I was brushing up on this topic, I was hearing some of the Beatles music and it was like
Creeping you out.
giving, yeah, it was giving me that vibe. It was weird, it was dark.
Because you have an association with it. That's interesting. That's very interesting.
So
Yeah, because if you're looking for some, like if you, and that's the interesting thing about it too, because that just goes to show you like something we talk about all the time. Manson's looking for something very specific in these songs. And of course, if you do that, you're going to find it,
yeah,
right? You look for something new,
absolutely,
you know?
absolutely. So
So,
he is, on this verge or this path to try to find fame, right? And he'll do anything he can to get it.
mhm.
Is he a narcissist?
Yeah, I mean, even maybe even a malignant narcissist, right? The worst kind of narcissist. And I think like maybe when he starts to realize that he's not gonna become famous, maybe this is when he starts to decide, and I don't know if it's, conscious, but he thinks, well, if I'm not gonna be famous, maybe I'll be infamous. And this is where we can start to talk about the
Yeah.
murders.
Well, and then one of the things that's really important to know about these murders is like I think there's two things here, Greg. I think what you said is very true. Like
Yeah.
maybe there's this idea, this drive for to be infamous, but I also think there's a bigger drive to start something. And I
Mm,
think some of these murders he thought would be done and maybe they wouldn't get caught, but like the intention was to alert people that this race war was real so that maybe he could kind of cash in on that. Not cash in financially, but maybe that would be his moment to rise up because I've been preaching this whole time, and I'm their leader. And maybe it would like raise his status. I don't know. It feels
Yeah,
like that there's something there.
there's also that, like, when we talk about a narcissist, we're talking about someone who feels inferior. So it also could be, and we see this with sometimes with other personality disorders too, is okay, I fear abandonment. I don't ever want to be alone,
Yeah.
but I will test this relationship to make sure you know what I mean?
You're gonna do what I ask you to do. Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
if
that
you
I
if you'll
think
do
that's big with
this,
cult leaders, right?
yeah, absolutely.
The other thing with the cult leaders though is like we've seen so many times where they've predicted something to happen and it didn't come true, and then
Mhm.
they're stuck in a in a position where it's like everyone's
Yeah.
just looking at it and they're like, so what's next?
Yeah.
And we've seen some interesting things where sometimes the cult members are like, oh no, we're fine, let's keep going, we're,
Because
we're
you're in
still
deep.
we're still on the right path. And then other times people walk away. But with him it's almost like I'm going to create it so
Mhm.
that I don't look like a phony.
That's
So
smart. Yeah, that's well,
yeah.
it's not I mean, it's smart that you're coming up with that. I'm not saying it's smart what Manson did, but
I
I
mean,
yeah. Yeah, no, you're right, though. I didn't really think about it like that. It's like horrible things are gonna be happening, and, like, I'm predicting it, but we're also doing it.
yeah. So what I'm alluding to here for people who aren't following what I'm trying to say, um, with these murders, in which I'll describe briefly some of
Yeah,
them.
briefly. I mean, they're
Yeah, and they're pretty well known. Most people know at least about the Tate House murders. But what he has them do at the end is write in blood on the walls
mhm.
messages, and the intention for those messages in blood was for them to be thought of as race
Yep.
um, murders, right?
Hate crimes, whatever.
Hate crimes. So it's like we're killing these white people, and now I'm going to write messages on the wall so people will think that a black person did these
Mhm.
crimes, and they're going to assume that there's something going on, and that's going to instill this or start this movement of what what he's been predicting this whole time. So I think that had a really big driving force, that maybe he was trying to create something so that he would be right. He would be the guru who knew exactly what was going to happen. But little did anyone know that he actually created it.
Yeah.
So the first murders that everyone knows of, or I don't know if these are actually the first ones, because there are some murders that have not fully founded, I guess. But this is the most notable one. This was on August 8th in 1969. It is at 10 150 Cielo Drive, which
Mm.
is, I guess, a famous address at this point. Um, there is what is it? Four members: Watskin, Watson, Atkins. I combine those two. Kren Winkle and Linda Casbian. Those are the four members that go to this address, and they were told to totally destroy everyone in it and do it in as gruesome a way as you can.
Yeah.
Those are their directions. So they go to this cello house that evening where Sharon Tate, who was 26 at this time, a budding actress, very, very beautiful,
Very beautiful.
married or partners with Roman Polanski. Was
I'm
she married?
married to Polanski, who is a pedophile, gross person.
All right, but at the time, maybe
Yeah.
not yet.
Okay.
Um, so Roman Polanski, obviously, very well known for Rosemary's Baby,
Yep.
which obviously, very interestingly, also like big satanic panic type
Mhm.
movie. So I mean, and this is definitely like satanic situation. So I'm sure there's some connections there from that. But it's Tate in the house, who was 26, and she was 8.5 months pregnant.
Yeah.
Her friend, Jay Sebring, who was also a former lover, he was 35, and he was a noted celebrity hairstylist. There was Polanski's friend, Frykowski, um, and Frykowski's daughter, Abigail Ann Folger, who
Mm.
was the heiress to Folger's coffee fortune and daughter of Peter Folger.
Yeah, so in 1969, you gotta think Starbucks and Dunkies, well, maybe Dunk, I don't know, but, like, Folgers was the real deal.
Yeah.
This was a rich person.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Um, And then also present was a 19-year-old caretaker, William Garrettson, and his friend, 18-year-old Stephen Earl Parent, who just were in the wrong place at the wrong time, unfortunately. Polanski was in Europe working on a film. And actually, Quincy Jones was a friend of Sebring, and he planned to join them later that evening, but changed his mind. So he luckily was not present for him. So this all starts with Watson climbing a telephone pole and cutting the phone line to the house. Classic move right there.
Classic, dude. That's horror.
Um,
Classic horror.
yeah. As they are there, a headlight start to approach, and Watson orders the woman to lie in a bush. He steps out, and the driver was that guy, Parent, the 18-year-old, and Watson, points a gun at him, and Parent begs him not to hurt him, but he ends up getting him with a knife, and then shoots him 4 times in the chest and abdomen and kills him in his car. So starts off right with a pretty gruesome murder, and that's kind of the theme here. These are not just little light murders; these are like gruesome, like they
Gruesome.
were told to do. So they cut a screen. They go. Watson goes through the screen to get into the house, and then he lets the rest of them in through the front door. They wake up Frykowski, and Frykowski asks him what they were doing here, and Watson says, "I'm the devil. I'm here to do the devil's business." Um,
Yeah,
they
imagine
finally,
getting that message right
oh
before
my
you
goodness,
dying, right before someone's
that
about to kill you. It's like, geez, what?
that's crazy. They get the other 3 occupants and they bring them all to the living room. Um, Folger escapes and flees out of the bedroom to the pool area, but then is tackled and stabbed. Watson helps to kill her, and she was stabbed a total of 28 times.
Yeah, it's overkill.
Frykowski struggled across the lawn. Watson continues to stab him, and he's stabbed 51 times. Tate pleads to be allowed to live long enough to give birth, offers herself as hostage, and instead they end up stabbing her a total of 16 times, killing her, and the unborn baby ends up passing away shortly after.
Yeah, dude, that is like the when we say like synonymous with the most horrific type of murder, this is what we're talking about.
Yeah,
That's fucking dark, dude.
yeah.
And then to be writing shit and blood and everything after,
So
like,
yeah, the last thing was Manson. Like I said, had told them to leave a sign, and he said something witchy. So they wrote "pig" on the front door in Tate's blood.
yeah.
I thought they wrote more, but maybe I'm thinking of
They rate more
some of the
on the
other.
other in the next murder, the LaBiancas, they rate like Helter Skelter.
Yeah,
They write, but no, it's just stuff like that. Pig.
yeah.
I don't know. And I don't know why, like, how is he trying to put this on? Like, why should people think that this was like the black community? Like, why would, like, what's the sign?
Maybe that's like, well, obviously we know they're talking about cops,
I,
or is
I don't
that
know what, see,
is
that's the
Mike?
thing. Like, I was trying to figure out, like, what do they mean by pig? Like, are they talking about, I don't know. The reason why they're at Tate's house, though, it wasn't supposed to be, it's not like they hated or he had anything to do with Tate. It's like, um, the producer guy, I forget his name,
Yeah, was
Terry
supposed to be
Felcher,
there.
maybe or something like that. Yeah,
Yeah,
it was supposed
I
to be
mean,
his house.
and there's some thoughts that maybe this is like a revenge thing because he's so angry about, it's that whole drive for stardom.
It's all about
he
him.
doesn't he doesn't get the opportunities he wants, and he takes it out on everyone around him. So it's the rationale is not, I don't think the rationale is known by his followers, or at least they're not
No,
understanding it to the so like what's going on in Manson's mind is obviously a lot different than what's going on in his followers' mind. They think they're doing these tasks, they're carrying out these murders for some sort of purpose, and meanwhile it's probably just his ego
or
and
even just
wanting to
that
start something.
his frame of mind is, just like his mother kind of taught him from an early ages. If you're not serving me well, I'm going to dispose of you.
Yeah.
That's it. And then Manson just does that in a different fashion, I suppose.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
he's not
so
actually having the courage to do it himself.
so he ends up sending um 2 more people out the next night because he was displeased with the previous night's murders, and they go to 3301 Waverly Drive in the Los Feliz section of Los Angeles. And that is where they kill Rosemary Bianca
Mhm.
and her husband, I believe.
Yeah.
Um, Another like horrendous crime. Obviously not as well known as the previous one. But one thing he does in this one, I mean, this is pretty gruesome. He carves the word war into the man's abdomen.
Yeah, that's when you're carving into people, that's
Yeah.
dark.
And when I say he, it's not obviously not Manson because he doesn't do these murders.
I know, and that's the thing. It's like, where is that? Like, what's the disconnect there? Like, why do we see him as like, just is it because he's giving the orders? Like, but like he didn't have the courage to do any of this stuff. But
Yeah.
it's also like, but at the same time you give him credit. Like it's almost like you're giving him this, preternatural ability too. Like we're thinking more highly of him too, just because he was able to command these people to do it. But they're just manipulated, lost, drugged out young people
Yeah.
who think they're serving some greater purpose than themselves, disillusioned.
I'm sorry, it was Leno LaBianca was the husband's name. So he was a supermarket executive, and
Yeah.
his wife was Rosemary, a owner of a dress shop. So those were the two individuals who were murdered in that one.
I know, like somewhere I said that Manson went to a party at his house, and then maybe
Yeah,
like he
the
felt a
previous
little
year.
slighted or something by them
Hmm.
or something. Who knows?
Yeah,
Um, but
I
wow.
mean, and Watson sounds like a real piece of something. Like he was, I guess he was complaining to Manson about the inadequacies of the weapons the night before and stuff like that. So they used like a chrome plated bayonet
Yeah.
for this one. It's just like, I don't know what the need is for all this. I don't think anyone knows. There isn't
No.
one, right? Death
No,
to
and then
pigs, rise, and like you said, helter skelter are written in blood on walls and on the refrigerator.
you
It's just
know
a gruesome scene.
that is a gruesome scene. Like I've been in a house one time, like an abandoned house, and this you'll kind of appreciate this, where like, I was a teenager and I'm walking through this. I guess people would like teenagers and stuff would hang out there, and the stuff teenagers will write on the walls when you're in somewhere and it's dark and like it says like it was like it said like rape and like all kind like
Oh, I know. They write the
satanic shit, like
keywords.
like
They
they
write the
really do the,
keywords. Yeah.
and you're like, holy, it does kind of,
They draw swastikas.
yep,
Like it's
it is,
silly.
it does creep you out though.
No. It's
No,
when you get past that, like what it is, it's
yeah,
like because like I get it that you were saying like I'd appreciate that because like that's something I was enjoying doing for a while, going into abandoned buildings.
mhm,
And like but after you realize what it is, it's just stupid teenagers writing like words and then chuckling about them, or just
okay.
writing the most heinous thing they can think of just to like it just is like almost like irritating.
Yeah, as a
And
teenager though, I remember walking through those places and being a little
yes, but
creeped out.
because you had a vision of what you actually think, who you actually think wrote it, and it's not the
What a
reality of
great analogy for anxiety, right?
right.
Where it's like, I see that, and now it's not the reality. I have thoughts and beliefs about things
Yeah,
that don't exist at all, where I'm picturing people in like hoods and robes and albino monks drawing that, and
yeah.
like women like chained up or whatever it is. Like that's what I'm thinking, but none of that happened at all. It was like
No, it's some
pimple
little
faced
two little
teenagers.
yeah
Yeah.
nerdy teenagers in there.
Yeah.
He, and then they run
Yeah.
away.
Yeah. Oh man. All right. So I mean, what else is there to say? Like
Greg, you had mentioned off air that one of the Manson family members had a pretty interesting story. So I just figured maybe I could briefly talk about her. But that
sure,
was
sure.
Lynette Squeaky
Oh, okay.
Frome, I guess is
Yeah.
how you would say her last name. So she was a member. She was actually one of the first ones who he got to move into the woman we mentioned who he uses for her house, and he brings in the 18 women. She was one of the first ones. I think she was like the second member pretty much.
Yeah.
Um, but she was not involved in any of like the Tate murders or any of that stuff. Instead, she ends up going to prison later for an attempted assassination on President Gerald Ford in 1975.
Wild.
So like, some of these people are just obviously destined for this path. So maybe they just kind of fell into the right place at the right time when they met him. Um, she was sentenced to a life in prison, but she was paroled in 2009 after serving approximately 34 years. When you hear like what happens, I guess like at first I was like, attempt assassination on a president and you're paroled, but like the story itself is kind of like, I guess I can understand. So she was 19. She had dropped out of college, went to Venice Beach after her parents threw her out, and this is when she meets Charles Manson in 1967. He sees her on a curb at a bus, watching a bus arrive, and Manson exits the bus and he goes over to her and he says, "Your parents threw you out, didn't they?" And then she decides that he's a psychic
Hmm.
and decides to follow him from that point on. So that's
Meanwhile,
their
she's got like the stick and the little like handkerchief filled with
yeah.
things on it. She's like, how'd you
So
know?
yep. So that's their chance encounter, and she becomes a second member. She lived with them at that Spawn ranch that you mentioned, and she ends up becoming that the ranch owner George Spawn. She becomes his like basically his servant, and she does everything for him, including
Yeah.
the sexual stuff. Like,
Yeah.
and yeah, she's like one of those people that will basically do whatever she's asked to do. She's going to carry out whatever, and she gets the nickname Squeaky because that's the noise that she makes when someone touches her, I guess, or when George Spawn touches her.
Yeah.
I don't get the impression that I like he's older, right?
Yeah. He's like grossly old.
You just his name, I was like, he's grossly old. I can just
Yeah.
envision this guy, and she's squeaking every time he touches her.
Ah,
Um, but in 1975, she goes to Sacramento's Capitol Park to plead with President Gerald Ford about the plight of the California redwoods. She's dressed in a red robe and armed with a semi-automatic pistol. The pistol's magazine's loaded with 4 rounds, but there's no round in the chamber. So she points the gun at Ford and immediately is restrained by the Secret Service. And as she's apprehended, she's yelling, "It wouldn't go off. It didn't go off. Can you believe it? It didn't go off." But then, like 5 years later, she ends up saying that she had basically says she had no intention of actually killing him, that she had deliberately ejected the round from her weapons chamber before leaving home that morning, and investigators actually were able to found the round on her bathroom floor. So I guess that kind of says
yeah.
maybe that's true. So she went there, pointed a gun with actually no intention of killing him, and the gun was still loaded. Like she could have brought a completely unloaded gun, and maybe that would have sent a better message that she wasn't
Well,
trying to
that's
kill
you just
him.
said the word there. You just said the word. The hippies are all about the message. They're
Yeah,
all about a dramatic message.
right. So her
The gun at the
intention
front.
mainly feels like it was to get arrested.
Yeah. And she just didn't think it would go that bad.
Yeah, I guess
They
not.
really locked her up for a long
Like,
time.
what did she think the outcome was going to be? But
Um,
I mean,
LSD.
yeah,
LSD
the
and
wild thing.
and this poor girl too. I mean, geez, like being taken
She
advantage of by an old dude. Hollywood.
Sure, and she's
Hollywood.
19 at the time, and
Yeah.
she's like, getting involved with all of Manson's philosophies. And it sounds like after after the Manson murders and all that stuff, she just continues to be the biggest hippie she can, and like is constantly.
Mm.
She actually, who's the Led Zeppelin guy that she tried to meet? Do you do you know the guitarist? Is it Jimmy Page?
Jimmy Page. Yeah.
So she actually, like before this Ford thing, she tried to meet Jimmy Page at a concert and she ends up, I think it's like his manager or something or someone. She's like pleading with him, like, please let me see him, let me see him. I have to forewarn him that he's about to be like he's going to be embraced by evil or something evil is going to happen to him tomorrow. And the guy's like, yeah, you can meet him like another day or tomorrow after the show. And she goes, no, it's too late. And they basically just carry her out.
Like, okay. I think Jimmy Page does have some kind of like weird, creepy stuff going on with him, like living in like a haunted castle or something like that.
She was trying to warn him.
She tried to warn him. Didn't get to him in time. So what's up with so now when I think of Manson and he's almost when you see Manson now or when you did see Manson and you see him with the SWAT sticker on his forehead, it was an X originally to kind of I don't know what that was supposed to sort of represent like I'm not a member of society anymore or you know I don't know what. I'm not in his head. But like what do you think that was? Like did that do you think that this is what he had intentions of happening or like I mean,
I think he thought he was going to be a famous musician.
yeah.
And then he got his fame a different way. And
Kind of leaned into it.
I think he leaned into it because,
Y-
well, I don't think he really had another choice. So,
mhm.
and Manson's kind of that guy that, like he said about his mom, it's like you got to just do things on your own. Like you can't rely on other people. So, I get that kind of forces you to have to adapt,
Yeah.
right? So
No,
you just,
yeah, and it probably like that's a mask he'll have to wear for the rest of his life. Like, you know, ironically, all he was trying to do was keep people close, but in the end, he had to wear a mask that would keep people far away from him,
but it still
right?
doesn't though, because it still
I know
attracts
people are
people.
there's for whatever
He got
reason people are
married in prison.
yeah, that was like one like there's always that like crowd where it's like they're gonna like, well, I want to marry Jeffrey Dahmer, I want to marry Dennis Rader, I want to like,
Yeah.
because maybe their drive is the same thing. Like they're saying they want that little bit of fame or
And
whatever.
I get it. Like there is something alluring to like these figures,
Hmm.
serial killers, cult leaders. There's something alluring to them that drives like our interest and like trying to figure them out. But there's some people who genuinely seem to have like an attraction towards it.
Yeah,
And
no, I know there is something alluring. Like I mean, if you usually people will gravitate more towards the negative than the positive, especially like with like memorabilia that way. Like, would you rather have like Charles Manson guitar or like Michael Phelps one of his gold medals? I mean, it's like, I mean, most people are going for that guitar, right? I mean,
yeah,
that's a
I was trying to figure out how to get like he was doing these paintings and stuff. Wasn't
aren't they always doing that? They
Yeah,
all
because
do
that
that.
was like Gacy was doing that too, right?
Yeah, Kevorkian did it. Oh, Kevorkian stuff was good though.
See, I don't lump Kevorkian in with these people. I feel like he had some intentions
Oh yeah, no,
that were noble.
I would feel fine with Kevorkian's art in my house. I don't think
Yeah,
I would want like a Manson piece or anything
I
like.
I think people got to remember, like, if you're gonna like go to bat for someone like Charles Manson, you're owning
Yep.
every viewpoint that he has. So like you're putting a really big
Hmm.
label on your back that says exactly what you're all about
Yeah.
if you're going to back up a guy like that. And if you don't know, and you should find out before you go to bat for someone like Charles Manson.
Yeah. Like you're not don't just be like, "I look, I'm one of these emos or what are they called?" You know what I mean? Like I don't
Yeah.
know, we're not young
Charles
anymore.
Manson is not emo.
No. No.
He
Or
is
what's the other word I'm thinking of though?
goth.
Yes, thank you.
He's not that either, It's funny. He's like hippie. He's dark hippie,
He's a
right?
bad hippie.
He's
Yeah.
a bad hippie. He's a
Almost like
fake hippie. He's a fake hippie because he's
yeah,
like he's dressed. He's presenting that peace and love, but
he's a
inside there's
deceiver.
there's literally zero peace and love.
Yep.
The only love he has is maybe for himself, and he probably hates himself.
And that's why the word, geez, and we're gonna keep going and so talk about like the devil elements in this, but it's like that word at its root means the deceiver.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about here. Like this person who wears the cloak of peace and love, but is really just murderous and evil.
So I guess if we were to do a part two of this episode, which I don't think we need to, I would be curious when he becomes like kind of a devil,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
embracing the devil, because like you said, doesn't he have like the pentagram on his
Yeah,
hand?
he gets it. He's identityless.
Yeah,
That's
I
the
think you're
thing,
right. I think you're
you
right.
know?
Because nothing about this that we described today has anything to do with embracing the devil,
No.
worshiping the devil. It's actually no, it's none of that. It's all about reincarnation, hippie love, and then it turns obviously violent and paranoid. But
Like a
like there's no,
petulant child that didn't get
yeah.
his way.
But you're right. I think he just goes with the thing that he thinks is going to bring his success. So, like him embracing the hippie lifestyle, that being a guru, that's because he thought that was his key to success.
He's a chameleon, a
Yeah.
dark chameleon. Yeah.
A dark chameleon.
but also colorful because I don't know if a chameleon could just be dark. But all right, yes. So there you have Charles Manson all wrapped up for you.
Okay. So thank you everyone for listening. As always, and we say this every week. Um, please do your due diligence. If you're listening on a podcast, please, rate, find a place to review, all that good stuff. If you're on our new YouTube station, and just so everyone knows, if you looked at our YouTube station and you're like, why is that video not here yet? We are releasing the video like a day, sometimes a day and a half later than the audio. But it's worth it because you get to look at us. And I guess that's kind of cool and neat, right?
It is.
Maybe,
I think so.
maybe.
It
Yeah.
adds a little something, I think.
So if you are on YouTube and you're watching us, leave us a comment, so make sure you subscribe, like the video, all that good stuff. We're still building that little community and that is taking some time. So we appreciate any help and support we can get in doing that. But yeah, thank you all for listening and for watching and whatever you do. And yeah, that's about it, right, Greg?
That's it, Dave. And we appreciate it.
Good. Everyone, thank you so much. Have a great night. We'll see you next week. Peace out.
Bye bye.